All right, so we had our first official lesson in algebra today, so now we can actually start doing more stuff that will help you in your algebra class in math lab. So these are the goals from today's lesson. So I mentioned before that if you can meet those learning targets, that the bullet points that say I can usually, then you have met the goal. If not, then that's why we will usually refer back to them to make sure that we understand before moving on. So the first part of this was statistical questions from non-statistical questions. So what's an example of a statistical question? Timothy? Okay, so what is your favorite color? That could be like your survey question to figure out what the class's preferred colors are. So yeah, that's statistical. What makes that question statistical? Table 2. You expect to have a variety of answers. Sometimes like maybe you ask the class and they all have the same color. That's fine, but you would normally expect a variety of answers. So good from your statistical questions. What's an example of a non-statistical question? Table 4. So only one possible right answer. What's an example of a non-statistical question that has just one right answer? Table 1. Okay, so let's revise that. What is, and then remind me your name. What is Jaden's name? All right. There's only one right answer, isn't there? What's her name? Jaden. Now, if we wanted to make it a statistical question, like what are the different types of names in the class or something like that, then we could say, you know, like what's your name, and then have that variety of answers. But if I'm asking about like one specific person, then yeah, there should only be one answer, so that's a non-statistical question. Okay, so good. Seems like we know the difference for that. So the other learning target was the difference between numerical data and categorical data. So would I expect numerical data from what's your favorite color? No, because numerical data has numbers. So like answers that are numbers versus categorical data where could be like the color blue, the color purple, anything that is a category or not a number would be your categorical data. So any questions on the learning targets? You good on those? All right, so then you did have an assignment. Of course, I told you about it toward the end of class, so maybe some of you started it, maybe some of you haven't yet. I will give you, and I told you it was a really short one. I'll give you like 10 minutes to work on it right now, and then we can review it and stuff. For all of these algebra assignments, your goal is to get an 80% or higher. So let's see. The way that I do your math lab points, because this is obviously an algebra assignment, is that if you meet the goal, so if you do the task that I assign you, then you get points for math lab too. So this grade will go in algebra, but then if you meet the 80% or higher, I'll give you full points for the math lab portion of that. You do get 2 attempts automatically. So if the first time you do it, you only get a 50% or something along those lines. Do it again, shooting for at least an 80%. There's only 3 questions. On one of them, it is partial credit, so you could get like an 89% or something like that. You can get 100%. As long as it's 80% or higher, then you met the goal. And if you're not sure how to tell, well, I think it gives you out of 10 points, whatever number it gives you, maybe it's 8.9 or something like that. When we do 8.9 divided by 10, get 0.89. When you times by 100%, you get the percent, which is 80. Okay, so I'll give you 10 minutes right now to just work on it. Since some of you might already have it done, that's great. We'll go over like the most missed questions. So keep in mind, a lot of the time, whenever you take homework or a quiz, it will be shuffled. Not every time, but just so like don't blindly copy someone else or don't blindly copy me when we go over it, because you might like copy something wrong. All right. But my question said, would you expect to collect numerical data or categorical data for the following survey question? What are the most popular sports teams for people in 9th grade at my school? So numerical or categorical, table 3. One more time. Categorical. Anyone disagree with that? All right, pretty straightforward. Think about how you would answer that question. I don't know what your favorite sports team is. Chicago Bulls. Is that a number? No. So then it must be a category. All right. So then moving on. My question 2 says, would you expect to collect numerical data or categorical data for the following survey question? How many steps do I typically walk in a day? Table 1, what would the answer be? Numerical. All right, you may not know how many steps you typically walk unless you wear like a smartwatch. But if you did, like, what would you expect the answer to be? You would expect it to be a number, like 2,000 steps or something like that. Numerical. Those I don't think a lot of people had trouble with. It was this one that some people had trouble with. Anytime it's a select all, people tend to struggle with that because there could just be one answer sometimes. You have to check every single one and then select all that fit in that category. So, and then also a lot of the time on these tests, you can get points deducted if you pick a wrong answer too. So that's again another reason why some people struggle, but I'll teach you how to get better at that. So in this one, we want all the statistical questions. Do you guys remember what makes something statistical? Yes. If there's more than one answer. I mean, sometimes we do take surveys and everyone happens to say the same thing, but like it shouldn't be where there's just one possible answer, because then that wouldn't make it. Let me show you the formal definition too. If this is in the notes that are posted in Schoology from today's lesson, if you ever want to refer back to it, I usually don't spend time in class making you like write down definitions. We just use them. So yeah, a question that can only be answered by using data and where we expect data to have variability. So like a range of possible answers. All right. So then, and these answers might be shuffled too. So again, that's why I need to pay close attention. When you ask someone, why do you like to listen to music? What would you say that is? Statistical or non-statistical? Okay, and I think that's what the key says. Yeah, you can probably get a variety of answers. However, this is more like an essay type question, I guess. So that's why they said that this one is non-statistical. In my opinion, I think if you could break it down into categories, like, I don't know, because it calms you. It's fun to do, like those could be categories in my eyes. But according to the key, it's non-statistical. All right, what about if I asked you how many songs does the class usually listen to each day? Statistical or non-statistical? Okay, good. What is the typical amount of rainfall for the month of June in the Galapagos Islands? Statistical or non-statistical? And notice this one said like usually listen to or typical amount. What's another word for typical? Average. And if you remember, this unit is about statistics. Finding the average is a statistic in itself. So yeah, those are statistical questions. How long does it typically take for second graders to walk a lap around the track? Statistical or non-statistical? How much did it rain yesterday at the Mexico City International Airport? Is there just one correct answer to that? Yes. All right, so that would be an example of a non-statistical, so you're not going to want to take that one. Because you're asking on one specific day, so you one answer. How many songs did Pablo listen to yesterday, or today, sorry? Statistical or non-statistical? Okay, good. I did have to revise it from what it said earlier. It said, how many songs did you listen to today? That's why I changed you to Pablo, because it's asking like one specific person. There should only be one answer. If you look at it like, I don't know, yesterday, I might have been confused. That's why. But yeah, if you were trying to figure out how many songs does the class usually listen to, this would be your survey question. That makes sense. And then what's the capital of Canada? Statistical or non-statistical? Okay, good. So just 3 answers for this one that are statistical. Not necessarily in this order, they might be shuffled, but now you know. So if you still need, and I'll check and I'll let you know if you still didn't meet the goal later. But if you still need to meet the goal for today, 80% or higher, you just missed the goal. Yes? You think what? Okay, let me check and then I'll let you know. Yes? Okay, so I agree that this one's a bit more confusing because you could have a range of answers. So I agree with you there. However, let's look at the definition of non. Okay, so non-statistical questions can be answered by a specific measurement or procedure where no variability is anticipated. So how high is that building? If I run at 2 meters per second, how long will it take me to run 100 meters? So I agree that that one is, we would expect variability on that one. So I guess that does make it tricky. Let me look more into it. But I'm thinking because when you explain why someone likes to listen to music, that's more of like a paragraph versus like one single category. But I do agree that that one would be like the most confusing one out of it. So let me look, make sure that it wasn't like a mistake when we made it, because we transferred all of it into the homework. But yeah, if you go with this, it'll mark it as right. All right, questions on that? Or on anything else before we move on? All right, then go ahead and take out this paper from yesterday. We did some examples of topic 1 readiness. We're going to continue today. If I remember correctly, we did the entire front. We just have to do the back now. So to recap what we did, we went over the different types of numbers because on a test, it might say round to the nearest integer. You need to know what that means if you're going to make sure that your answer is right, and a bunch of other reasons why. But then a big skill that I notice a lot of people struggle with, especially coming into 9th grade for the first time, is operations with integers. Now, in the grand scheme of things, you'll have a calculator on all your testing and on your state testing. So even though like that calculator that's embedded in the software, I don't like, You still could bring your own calculator, so that is why in the grand scheme of things, as long as you know how to use your calculator, you should be fine. But when we have problems with a lot of steps, I know you probably just do some stuff in your head and you might not realize that you're doing it wrong. So this is why we're going over the rules to build more fluency with them. Okay, so I believe we filled out this whole front side, right? We did some deep dives. Okay, so adding the opposite is how I've always remembered it since second grade. All subtraction problems, you add the opposite. Now, sometimes that confuses people, and I get it. Here's another way that you could do operations with integers. And I call it the circle method. Other people call it the battery method, whatever you want to call it. But it's a great way to visualize what's going on. So say you have -4 plus 8. What you could do is this method of adding and subtracting them, where you look at the number 4. What's the sign on the 4? It's negative, so I'm gonna have 4 negative bubbles. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. So there's 4 negatives. And then what's the sign that's on the 8? So I'm gonna have 8 positive bubbles. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Just gonna make sure. Okay. And when you have a positive and a negative, they cancel each other out. Kind of like a battery, like has a negative on one end and a positive on the other. So for any pairs of a negative and a positive, those will cancel out. And what remains is what your answer is going to be. So I have 4 positive bubbles that remain. What's my answer going to be for this one? A +4. So that's another way that you could do it versus memorizing, like, okay, they have different signs, I need to find the difference, and then you keep the sign of the bigger number. You could just do your circles and do it that way. All right, it even works for subtraction. Say I have, let's see, 7 minus 11. All right, what's the sign that's on the 7? Positive, so I'm going to draw 7 positive bubbles. 5, 6, 7. All right, and then what's the sign that's on the 11? It's negative, so always keep the sign that's in front of each number. So that is a -11, so it's a -11. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And again, yeah, it's a little bit tedious, but it really does kind of like tie it in for a lot of my visual learners. So whenever you have a positive and a negative, they cancel each other out, right? 1 plus a -1 equals 0, so these all cancel out. And then based on the number of bubbles and the type of bubble it is, will give me my answer. So what's my answer for this one? -4. Some of you probably knew that just from looking at the problem. Great. But this is like another way to really visualize it. And then save there, you get problems like this, maybe -1 minus 3. All right, what's the sign that's on the 1? Negative. What's the sign that's on the 3? So then I have 3 negative bubbles. Do any of them cancel? No, because the other one's not positive. All right, so like none of them cancel because like you need the kind of like a battery, positive and negative end for it to cancel. See what remains though. How many bubbles do I have? And what's the sign of the bubbles? So then, yeah, you can think of it that way too. Questions on that? So just a suggestion, you know, if you're struggling with like your integers, you can do that, or at the very least know how to check it with the calculator. All right. So now we're gonna move on to multiplying and dividing. Any questions before we do that? So multiplying and dividing, I think is easier. Because if you have an even number of negative signs, your answer is going to be positive. And then you have a few examples right here already answered for you. So you will still multiply the numbers together like normal, the base numbers. But depending on how many negative signs you have, if it's an even amount, what are the examples of even numbers, by the way? Okay, good. Also including 0, but yes. Then your answer will be positive. So 3 times 4, are there any negatives in this problem? So my answer should be a positive 12. 0 is even. Now, negative 3 times negative 4 is also 12. How many negatives did I have? 2. So 2 negative signs. That means my answer is positive. And then does order matter in multiplication? It doesn't matter. I would just recommend doing it from left to right anyway, for good practice, but you really just multiply and then put the negative sign at the end if you need one. Count for negatives to determine that. Let me also write here too. So 0 negative signs. Answer is positive. All right, then if you're multiplying and you have an odd number of negative signs, so what are some examples of odd numbers? Do a different table. Table 2, examples of odd numbers. Okay, well, even numbers are 0, 2, 4, 6.
1, 2, 5.
And then any like in that pattern. Everyone see? Okay. So I wouldn't imagine that you're doing a multiplication problem and have like 7 things multiplied together. But just if it's an odd number of negative signs, your answer will be negative. And here's a few examples down here. So negative 3 times 4. 4 times 3 is 12, so that's why my base answer is 12. There was only 1 negative sign here. So 1 negative sign, which 1 is odd. That means my answer is negative. Negative. Same thing over here. We have now 4 numbers being multiplied together. But count the number of negatives that you have. I have 1, 2, 3 negative signs in the problem for the things to be multiplied together. Since 3 is odd, answer is negative. All right, that's why we get a negative 24 here. The 24 comes from doing what's 3 times 1, and then 3 times 4, and then 12 times 2. 24. All right, so then, yeah, you multiply like normal, but then you just worry about the negative probably at the end or first. I think would be the easiest one. So I'm going to give you a few U-tries so that you can practice what we just talked about for multiplying. And we didn't do dividing, but it's the same thing. Probably should have mentioned that. If you divide some numbers, you still count the negative, and that will determine if your answer is positive. All right. So let's see. Say I have 3 times negative 2. Don't yell it out, just do it on the paper. Then 4 times negative 2 times negative 1. one more. We'll do 6 times -4. 3 times. Right, so those three for you guys, just write them on your paper. And we'll go over it in like 2 minutes. Okay. So table 2, what's 3 times -2? Positive 6?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, class, agree, disagree? Let's see what the rule says. So if it's an even number of negatives, my final answer should be positive. If it's an odd number of negative signs, my answer should be negative. How many negative signs do I have in this multiplication problem? 1 is even or odd. So my final answer should actually be negative. All right, but yeah, 3 times 2 is 6. The sign will depend on how many negatives there are. So since there was 1, there's a negative. Good. All right, then let's see. Table 1, what about 4 times -2 times -1? 8, or positive 8? Class, agree, disagree? So we did like the multiplying the base numbers, 4 times 2 is 8, 8 times 1 is 8, and then there's 2 negatives, so my final answer should be positive. Easy. All right, now. Table 3, last one. 6 times -4 times 3 times 1 is 70 what? 72. All right, so 6 times 4 is 24. 24 times 3, you might have to do that one with your calculator. Think of it like 3 days, like 24 hours in a day. It is 72, and then 72 times 1 is 72. Should it be a positive 72? Should be negative, and maybe you said that, maybe I just didn't hear you, but since there's one negative sign right here, and that's the only one that's there, one is odd, my final answer should be negative. And then say, I didn't give a division problem example, but you would also count the negative and see if it's even or odd, that would probably be what your final. All right, good, any questions? All right, for the remaining time and for the remaining points, I'm gonna put up a booklet. There will be a winner, the winner will pick a prize. I'll put those booklet for them.